Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Coaches Parley. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew Greenall, sitting in tonight for Theo, who we hope to have back soon and shortly. Tonight, we are joined by three gentlemen. We have Lindsay, Doug, and Shawn. We should have Shawn Gilbert join as well, and possibly Ryan. They're joining a little bit late this evening, but we will let them in. Tonight's topic, we want to talk to our panel about the hockey prep schools, and in particular, like the CSSHL, the JWHL, the junior teams that are out there, and just the cost that's involved in those players attending those schools, and what could happen next year. One of the topics that came up in a discussion around planning tonight's show was, why is a parent spending $30, $40, $50, $60, even $70,000 to send their player to a prep school, not see any actual games or ice this season, and then be expected to pay the same amount next season? So what we're looking at is how this could actually affect the schools, what they could start planning and taking part in doing now by either recruiting or turning to some of the higher levels and seeing what they're doing for scouting aspect. So let's bring in our guests. Let's talk to them, get their input on this. I'm actually quite interested to see what they have to say about this matter, because it is something that I think a lot of parents are going to be thinking about now that we're going into Christmas. Currently up here in Canada, we're in a lockdown, and what is going to happen in the future. Let's bring these guys in and talk to them. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Great to see all of you. Lindsay's camera isn't working properly. We were looking at the ceiling. We said we just put that on all night. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight. Hi.
Hey, thanks. Lindsay looks great.
Doesn't he? Doug thought that he looked really handsome.
Better than usual.
So, gentlemen, like I said during the intro, we want to touch base and talk to you guys and get your feedback on what could be happening moving into the future. Ryan, thanks for being here, bud. Thanks very much. We want to talk about what the prep schools could be doing right now to help recruit players for next season, looking at the added expense that quite a few parents have gone through this season. So boys, it's a round table. Whoever just wants to start talking about this, let's go at it. I'm not going to set a timer. We are going to have some commercial breaks. But other than that, I'm interested to see your guys' thoughts coming from a previous GM with the Arizona Coyotes, Doug, who's a GM and owner in Wisconsin. Ryan, I believe you're out of Saskatchewan?
Ontario.
Ontario. And then we have Shawn. I can't remember where you're from, Shawn.
I'm in Saskatchewan, but no one ever tasked me with any player decision making. I was just a broadcaster in the Western League for 9 years.
Yeah. So, boys, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you guys think that this is going to go? Like, as parents, we're all sitting back wondering, what's going to happen moving into the next season. Why would I spend $70,000 to send my kid to a school?
Well, for me, it's the challenge of that in the first place. It's been sort of sad to see, to a degree, how the gap between the rich and the poor in the sport continues to grow, and the academies are a big part of that. At the same time, I've known a lot of great people that work for those academies and excellent players that have come out of there. So I have to be, appreciative of the work they do. And I think they do excellent work, but just the existence of the academies in the first place continues that divide between the have and the have-nots in the hockey world. As for the context of, in COVID, why should you pay next year if you paid this year? I mean, everybody's sort of dealing with this on the fly. Nobody knew to the degree how it would take out the actual in-game experience. I'm not as familiar with what they're doing this year as maybe some others are, but I would think, given that they are at a hockey academy, and I think you're still allowed to practice in a lot of them, that they're still getting a high level of skills training that they might not get if they weren't there.
But Shawn, do you think that it's justifiable for an academy, even a prep school, to be able to turn around and look at someone like yourself, a parent, and say, look, it's going to be, we know you just paid 50 grand this season, it's going to be 52 grand next season.
I think probably a great majority of, well, you could maybe discount it some because of the lack of travel. I would have to look into the books of these organizations to see where does their budget get allocated. If you're not traveling, you're not going into hotel rooms and stuff like that, you probably save some money from that. But at the same time, these organizations have to meet their bottom lines. Their enrollment is certainly going to be down this year. I know there's quite a few kids that were planning to play academies that decided to stay home because of the COVID situation. So it's ultimately going to just be a capitalist decision. Do you still feel like there's enough value in sending your kid there again next year? And you can make that negotiation maybe yourself with the individual school to see how much you think you should get back. But I imagine the costs are still the costs for these academies, paying their staff, paying for their building, paying for their ice time. Outside of the travel, they're still having to fork over all that cash. So they're not going to be able to just hand out these spots for free.
The academy business is exactly what it is. It's a business. And the business and academies are taking probably a beating this year. And I used to work at a hockey academy here in Ontario, and I know that they're hurting. Enrollment is down. Look at adults and parents with their jobs. Some of them have lost their jobs. How do you afford to send your kid to a $20,000 to $50,000 a year prep school if you lost your job over COVID, right? So, what is going to happen to some of these academies who live and die by the tuition dollars? Some of these academies don't have enough to get themselves through these seasons. Some of them do, but you're going to see some of these academies that are hurting right now go by the wayside because they're not going to be able to find enough players to have a program next year, right? So, are academies a good thing? Sure they are, as long as you do your homework and you pick a good academy. If you don't do your homework, you could end up at a poor academy. But some of the best prep schools are in New England. I know the Western Canada's put together a decent CSSHL program, but the best ones are in New England at the end of the day. Academically, most Division I commitments. If you're going to a prep school, those are the ones that you want to be going to.
You're starting to see some of these faith-based academies crop up, and there's one based out of Minneapolis. I won't say the name, but I've had a lot of interaction with kids coming out of their program. I've had a few kids from the academy play for me. Had a young man that was at that academy this year, and he was probably a legitimate guy. He probably had a legit shot to play, and he's a D1 guy for sure. And he's just done. He just walked away because the pressure that's being put on them. We've got a unique situation where we are here. We looked at doing an academy and basing it solely on education, just that straight education and hockey, high-end education stuff. And we've shied away from it, I think, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the COVID situation, the change in platforms and models this year of what's going to come out of this year. But you're starting to see from my end of it with the recruiting, and you guys can weigh in on where you guys see it. And I'd be curious to see what Lindsay's position is with this, obviously at the NHL level. But, I'm starting to shy away from taking these kids from the academies because they're burned out, right? There's so much pressure on these kids, and there's no room for these guys to mess up at all at some of these schools. And it obviously depends on who's coaching there and who's running it. But I'm starting to see it more and more consistently that that these kids, by the time they get to the point of wanting to come play juniors or even having that opportunity based upon their age or skill level, they're burned out. They're done. And the families are burned out. They've been promised all this stuff. They think that there's an expectation and belief of what they're paying for and earning. And I don't know. We're starting to shy away from even taking a look at kids from these academies because they seem to be more and more damaged. And so that's where I come from. That's where I see it. It's just you're getting damaged goods and for the most part. So
if anybody on this panel can talk about prep school hockey, I mean, Lindsay Hofford's had a prep school program here in Ontario for a long time, and he's I don't know if he's still heavily involved with it. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm sure Lindsay can attest to the trials and tribulations of the prep academy.
Yeah, that's why we actually brought Lindsay on this evening.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I can speak on it. I mean, we started the Hill Academy, I don't know, it's got to be 10, 15 years ago when they were kind of in its infancy. And I think I got involved in it the second year. And then I became the owner of the hockey program. But we started off at the first year I was there, we had 25 kids. And then over the time we evolved into like triple digits. We had obviously a really good lacrosse program as well. But I think with the COVID, you're not just paying for the game schedule. You're basically, the kids all had, professional workout every day, and they had their, skills training. We ended up having a couple of prep teams. I mean, the first year, I think we've got about 6 guys that are still playing professional hockey on that team. And I think 3 or 4 guys played in the National Hockey League last year. Shore, I think Renouf might have gotten some games, and Ryan Lomberg just signed again with Florida. So we had a real good team. So it was a great experience. But I agree with what Shawn said. I mean, they're gonna discount, or they should if they don't. They're gonna discount for obviously the travel. They're gonna discount for not playing games, but they are training, which I know the JWHL teams aren't even training here on or off the ice, so they do have that advantage. And then I think also you got to look at the school element. You're not just paying for the hockey. You're playing, and depending on the school, but you'd hope you'd have like-minded student athletes that have the same academic and hockey focus together, as opposed to maybe kind of like a melting pot of a normal high school. So I think there's different ways that you can justify the revenue streams that are generated, but definitely some trying times with COVID for everybody. And like you guys had mentioned, it'll be interesting moving forward what we see as far as how some of these businesses survive, and where the economy takes us, and really how long this kind of environment continues, because obviously the longer it goes, the tougher it is on people. So
Yeah.
Do you guys think broadly, and maybe I'm jumping way too far ahead, but that COVID may create some level of discussion with academies taking a hit, junior programs taking massive hits, even down to midget programs taking massive hits? The cost of doing business in this sport, from being a player all the way up to these organizations, has just grown and grown and grown and grown. I mean, there was a time, a Western Hockey League team had a GM and head coach who was the same person, an assistant coach, and maybe a part-time trainer. And now all of a sudden they're massive corporations. There was one person that ran the business office and some volunteers taking tickets, right? I mean, and now even at the junior A level, you have some teams that have 5 coaches on staff. You have academies that have massive operations. You have parents, one WHL parent told me between his 2 kids, he invested $80,000 in a year for their training and development. The numbers have skyrocketed to such a degree that, and there's so many people that their lives are dependent on this now, but now we're seeing, the effect financially on every level of the hockey business is there going to be a bit of a reset where all these organizations are going to have to trim down a little bit and say, did we need to go quite as far as we did? And is there a way to make what's going on in the sport maybe a little more efficient?
You're seeing that.
Doug, just hold that thought, please. Guys, sorry, we just have to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with a reply to that. Give us 1 sec.
At Super 8 Winnipeg West, we have your comfort in mind with free Wi-Fi and free daily Superstart breakfast. We also have guest laundry facilities, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a jetted hot tub. Sleep well in a spacious guest room equipped with plush new bedding, a 50-inch flat-screen HD TV, microwave, mini refrigerator, and Keurig coffee maker. Or book a suite with a kitchen, ideal for extended stays. Super 8 Winnipeg West, located just inside the perimeter on Portage Avenue.
Sorry, Doug, go ahead with your thoughts there.
No, Shawn, make a good point. You're already starting to see that, right? Like, you're starting to see a little bit of a vacuum get created, and there's a level, like we've known for a long time. I think everybody on here will admit there's a level of attrition that needed to happen. Like, we needed to clean house, right? That's why forest fires happen. If you don't log the forest, right, it'll take care of itself, right? I think maybe, everybody wants to talk about the bad financial aspects of the situation with COVID and teams being hurt and, boo-hoo. But we can all admit there's a lot of bad operators out there. And there's a lot of programs that honestly can sit there with a smile on their face and straight face and tell you that yeah, you should pay $70,000 for your kid to come here, or $50,000, or whatever the case may be. Like, and they sell them that dream, and knowing full well that there's no way to ever attain that for a lot of these kids. And I just feel like you're gonna see a lot of bad operators get cleaned out. Like, this might be the cleaning house that we all needed, and the ones that survive are the ones that have a level of common sense and can say to themselves, we don't need 7 coaches. We don't need, we don't need this. We don't need that. We don't need a $1.5 million budget at the junior A level. You could do it with an $800,000 budget, right? Like, and I know that still sounds crazy to think that at the junior A level, an $800,000 budget. But for us, in the States, we compete with the argument that, okay, there are these academies, these prep schools to go to, and then also the North American League, right? And the NCDC. And so, for us, cleaning house with a lot of the tier 3 junior B hockey stuff that these operators out there, it's not a bad thing. I mean, Ryan, you've been around, you've been at all the different levels. I mean, you got to see what I'm saying with that too, right? Like, cleaning house a little bit.
I'd be interested to hear from Shawn. Shawn's one of the coaches that coaches in Calgary with the North Stars. And Shawn, you guys do charge, I think, $10,000 for the season, Mr. Gilbert?
I think this year our midget AAA program was roughly around $8,000. The midget U18 program, still stuck on that midget thing. The U18 programs are roughly around $5,000. So one of the things about, you guys were talking about academies and stuff here, one of the things I see is we have an academy here in Calgary, and a lot of the kids are going to this academy because they're not making the quality teams here in Calgary or making the Airdrie Bisons or whatever. And they think it's another stream to get to where they need to go. But I'm also heavily involved in the KIJHL, which has been around a very long time. And there's been a ton of kids fed through the KIJHL into NCAA Div 3, right? So there's all kinds of different avenues. And kind of the reason that I like to coach at the level I do is I try to tell the kids, just because you didn't make that prep team or that U18 AAA team doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Like we have a kid that my son personally knows who's he's a 1999. He played 1 year of U18 quadrant hockey. He played 2 years of U18 community hockey. He went to the KI, played for 3 years, and now he's in the second pairing at Jamestown this year, right? So there's all kinds of different ways, but it's the dream. I don't know always if it's the dream of the kid, or sometimes a lot of times it's the dream of the parent, right? Let's be honest here. Like I have a 20-year-old son, and you know what? I played up in the AJ for the Red Deer Rustlers, and I was like, okay, you're gonna go here, you're gonna go here, but you know what? He just didn't have it. So it's the thing as a parent too, accepting, you know what? Is my son doing it for me, or is he doing it for him? Right? And a lot of parents push their kids into these programs and spend a ton of that money, right? So again, just because you don't make U18 AAA or prep doesn't mean you can't go to NCAA college anywhere, right? So
then how
look at it
are the North Stars justifying the $10,000 to $20,000 to play for them versus trying to, I guess, allow a player, or like you just mentioned, a parent going, no, let's go to the academy. So what are you guys doing to basically sell the fact that it's only 10 grand? How many coaches do you have? How many games do you have? How many practices do I get?
So basically in a non-COVID year, I think last year my team, we had 35 league games, and we had 3 tournaments. So roughly 45 games. And honestly, for my team, the U18 AA Blazers, I think it ended up being $5,000 for our teams. Again, I heard you guys talking, the U18 AAA program, a lot of the costs are the travel, right? I know in the Alberta Elite Hockey League, which used to be the major midget league here in Alberta, they try to keep the teams least amount of travel as possible. So for an example, if the AAA North Stars are going up north, they'll play Lloyd, Grand Prairie, and an Edmonton team on their way back, right? So they try to make round trips. It's not, okay, while you're going up there, you're playing every north team, right? So they kind of only play each north team, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's only once, and they play within their own southern conference like 4 times, I think, 4 or 5 times. So the biggest expense is travel. So you got these prep teams. Pilot Mound plays Edge. Pilot Mound plays all these teams. Well, Pilot Mound's in Manitoba on the border, right? Like there's a lot of travel, a lot of hotel, right? And that's where the provincial elite teams wouldn't have that expenses. Hence, I believe, is the cost difference. Plus, they're going to school in traditional Alberta high schools, right? They're not in an academy situation where they're at the school, they're living with the billet, and they're going to school at these places. So it's not comparing apples to apples.
I think, like, not to jump in before someone else has a chance either, but one of the things that strikes me is there's often this perception that you're going to get better coaching if you go to an academy because they've hired full-time people, but that's not always the case. Even when comparing to like midget or bantam programs, I think of the midget program in Swift Current. Up until this year, the last 4 or 5 years, the head coach was Darren Evian, who was a former SJHL Coach of the Year, who was a former Western Hockey League associate coach. You know, he was able to, they pay him a salary for part-time work while he's working full-time as a teacher. You got a very experienced head coach, assistant coaches who'd played a high level of hockey. Whereas if someone is getting paid full-time to coach at kind of an upstart academy, you know, the salary they're getting won't match what that other person would get for a full-time job and their coaching gig. So maybe you can get a better coach in midget AAA in that case. And, you know, every situation is different, but just having full-time coaching doesn't mean it's going to be better. And in the meantime, you're paying 30, 40 grand instead of the 8, 10,000 that it would be to stay just in a, you know, a regular city program.
Is it the belief, like, is it the general consensus belief that by going to a prep school and paying off that you're going to get a coaching staff or a coach or an environment where the student athlete is first? Like, is that the belief that you see across the board? Like, I genuinely ask this question because I feel like I hear more horror stories. And if it sounds like I'm against academies or prep schools, I'm not. That's not the case. But I feel like nowadays you hear more horror stories of like bad negative experiences than then good. And like you just, and this is coming from interacting with an absolute truckload of kids in the process of scouting and recruiting for the Canadian Junior A hockey team, right? Like you're talking to a ton of these kids that are coming out, and whether it be at that U16, U18s, whatever the case may be, we deal with the Thunder Bay Kings. We those aren't academies per se, but you're still dealing with those kids at that level. We deal with a lot of the academies, Avon Old Farms on the East Coast and Connecticut and Massachusetts and whatnot. Like Ryan said, I mean, I don't think it's you can't really argue against that. That's, as Ryan put it, maybe these weren't his exact words, but it's kind of the hotbed, right? Like it's kind of the premier location, if that's what you're talking about. But is it a genuine belief that you're going to get a better experience, better coaching, better education, that it's going to be better all the way around because you're paying that price? Is that what you guys hear?
Before anybody answers that, we just got to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Go ahead, Ryan. Apologies. Go ahead.
No, all good. I think that, in terms of academy situation, I don't know how often midget U18 programs are practicing, but a lot of these academies, you're paying for the additional development, right? So, you're on the ice 5 days a week, sometimes 2 a days in certain academies. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that the Hill Academy had some 2-a-days, especially early on in the season. Plus the kids get development, as a regular gym credit, right? So, between practicing with their actual prep team, plus maybe a gym class credit that they're on the ice for, that's 2 ice times a day for the amount of price that you're paying. Where you play U18, well, you might only practice 2 or 3 times a week. So, you're not getting the same, amount of ice time. And everybody could say, oh, you need rests or whatever. But the more that you're out there on the ice, practicing, developing, and going through the paces, the better the opportunity is for you to get better. And I think that's what a lot of people pay for when it comes to the academy aspect, especially on the East Coast. I think it's also a great, they call it prep hockey because you're supposed to prepare yourself for college. So going and living in a dorm situation and learning how that works so that when you do go to college, you're able to, fend for yourself and not just kind of be lost and go, oh my goodness, I'm 20 years old and I've never lived alone before and I don't know what I'm doing. Right?
Is that
So
really impacting the players? Do you think that's really impacting the players, Ryan, by having them attend those dormitory style prep schools?
Some of the best players that I've got to coach came out of those dormitory prep schools. I've also coached some great AAA kids. So, it depends on the player, and not every player has the same financial resources as others. And, it also depends on how good you are. If you're a good player, you're not going to some of these academies and having to pay a full shot. Kids are getting, scholarship because of how good of a hockey player they are. You hear about it all the time. Like, top end kids are going to the top prep schools in New England and getting full academic opportunities because of how good of a hockey player they are. And there's nothing wrong with that, So, I don't know. I think that there's a place for prep hockey. I think that it serves a purpose and a value. You've got to do your homework just like any junior program. You've got to make sure that you get what you pay for. And if you're just, not doing your homework and doing your due diligence to ensure that the place that you're choosing to go to play or go to school is going to give you what you need in your future, well, then you've got to move on to the next place. And that's it. You got to do your homework.
Well, one of the things here in Calgary, I know for a fact, like our U18 AAA team is on the ice 6 days a week. But I agree with Ryan. You got all the other stuff. Like these guys, like you said, you have 2-a-days. We won't have 2-a-days in Calgary. They probably do off-ice dryland training every day as part of their gym credits, like Ryan said. And they probably do video review every day, right? They can go over that. They can review video their practices and say, hey, come into the classroom. We're going to go over video of our practice and where you can get better. But that opportunity is not available at our level. But like I said, the U18 AAA are on the ice 6 times a week in a normal non-COVID situation. I know the U18 AAs, we're 2 games a week, play Wednesday night, play Saturdays, and we're on the ice 3 or 4 times a week in practices. So the value is there in the associations, but is it worth that extra $15,000 to get maybe that one extra ice time and then the extra dryland training and the video sessions? I think what parents are really paying for in the prep programs is exposure. If you look at the last 3 WHL drafts, that's 15-year-olds, how many top 10 kids were prep school kids? I would say at least 70 to 75%, right? So parents know that they're planning in Adam, these kids playing, U10 Tier 1 or whatever, saying, okay, when I get to U15, I'm sending my kid to a prep school because his U15 second year, he's going to get way more exposure, right? And I think that's what the parents are paying for, is the exposure to the scouts.
No, Shawn, let me throw this out there. I'll use a school I mentioned, Avon Old Farms. What's the coach? John Gardner. He's been there for what, 46 years? John Gardner could pick up the phone and call any scout, any coach at any level, Div 1, Div 3, NHL, doesn't matter. He's got the ability to pick up the phone and call anybody on behalf of a player. WHL, QM, OHL, doesn't matter, right? And he can open a door for a kid that probably wouldn't have been afforded by maybe a coach in another situation. I only use John as an example because he's probably the grade A standard at that level of guys that's been around a long time. The guys get what they pay for or don't pay for because, as it was already mentioned, like Ryan said, a lot of those guys at Avon don't pay. They're not paying on their varsity squad. I bet you'd be hard pressed to find one kid on that team on the varsity level that's paying. And you ask, well, how are they supporting it? Well, they've got firsts, they got JV, they got first thirds, seconds, thirds. I think they've got 5 or 6 teams, right? Prep teams. Shattuck is no different. It's the same thing. And so, but you use John as an example that it fits right in where not always are you paying for, you're paying for some of what the peripheral is, what the doors that can be opened by going there and things like that. So like you say in the draft class, I mean, it maybe does stand out that it's a benefit. So,
Lindsay, what do you have to say?
I think every province, I would just say all the provinces are different. Like the climate in British Columbia is much different than Ontario. But I can tell you, I've coached in the GTHL and I coached the prep, and I had my kids play in both, and they're both great opportunities. What I did like about the academy was that when you were done school at 4 o'clock, you were done. And then if you were in minor midget, you would, playing for Don Mills or something, you had like a 9:30 practice. You got home at like midnight, and then the kid had to be up to go to school the next day. So the convenience of having your nights free to do, other activities and homework and whatnot was really good. It was basically a weekend schedule as far as games. And for me, the price of the hockey was pretty well the same. It was just, obviously you had to pay for the school aspect of it. So there's where, like, you got actually better value in the prep, because if in Toronto and you rent the ice at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, you're going to pay like $120 an hour, and you're going to do that at 7 o'clock the same day, you're going to pay like $300 or $400. So I think that's where some of the costs, there's a cost savings, and that's why some of the budgets, I don't know these schools that are, you guys are saying 70,000 or whatnot. I don't know how they can justify that, unless they've got like professors and really small class sizes or something. But from a hockey budget, I don't know why anybody would want to pay that, because it's not a need to. And I agree, a lot of the guys, the better guys, are on scholarships, or how we did it was a need basis, or if you were a really good student and you did well in academics, then you got like a check mark here. And if you needed financial assistance, we tried to work with it. Or if you were, a really good student and hockey player that helped promote the team and benefited all the other kids. And like you guys said, certain players are going to draw exposure to the program. So you need those guys, because some of the periphery guys, will gain some benefits from that. So, I just think the BC market, it's being kind of taken over by the academy model for some reason. Maybe it's the proximity or lack of proximity with based on population, and kind of now you can build some of these killer squads where, like in the JWHL, you can have 4 or 5 maybe NHL guys on a minor midget team. Now you can have this in the academy, where in BC, guys, kind of, if you're in your hometown, it was spread out a little bit more than the concentrated population, say, of Ontario. So I think people like that, where they can get players from all over the province and they can play together. So I mean, I think there's lots of positives to be said. There's lots of things that need to be fixed on both sides, and I think the only way you do that is through education. And you guys hit the nail on the head. People got to do their research, and they got to spend some time before they spend their money and ask pertinent questions. And if they do that, then I think at the end of the day, there's competition, and some of the guys that maybe aren't putting the proper product out will be squeezed out of the business. And I don't think that's an issue either. You want to have standards, and you don't want to be like the academy. You might have 10 really good schools and you got 2 bad ones. You don't want the 2 bad ones, ruining it for the other 10. So, I think it's just in its infancy, at least in Canada, and it's gaining steam. And I think it's here to stay, even though, COVID might take maybe a couple steps back for some of the entrepreneurs that are involved. But, it was a positive experience being involved with my kids, both my kids, and it was positive, as a person to be involved with it. But I've had the same experience on the other side with minor hockey too. They were always great. So
one of the things that I was really shocked about, you're talking about British Columbia. I got involved with the JC to the JWHL this year, and it's better for these kids to go play prep school hockey or play in the KI. They don't know. There's not a lot of kids that are the U18 age that want to play U18 AAA hockey. And so I did some research into that, and what I was told is it costs more money to play U18 AAA than it does to go to some of these prep schools or to play on a junior B team. Like, and a prime example is Shea Weber played for the Sycamore Eagles, right? What U18 AAA team did he play for, right? So that's very interesting to me.
The other thing with that level is again, it was mentioned about the travel gap, and because the major midget league or U18 league in BC is territorial based, I mean, there's some teams that just can't compete. So the competitive balance in that league is terrible, and level of play depends who you're playing night to night. I mean, I lived in Castlegar when I was the voice of the Smoke Eaters for 4 years, and the midget team out of the Kootenays was always horrible. They maybe won 1 or 2 games a year, So you're sending your kid there knowing they're going to struggle and lose 9-2 every night. And then on the other side, how much better are you going to get playing that team all the time? So yeah, the better young players were going to KIJHL programs, and a lot of good players came out of there, played WHL, Junior A, NCAA. One of the questions I had, that just for myself listening to you guys all talk, I mean, again, not a trainer, not a coach, not a talent evaluator, and I hear the arguments. You know, it's interesting hearing the academy side of it, that they're done at 4 o'clock, because when I'm hearing, you know, 6 days a week, 5 days a week, 2 ice sessions a day, video, games on the weekend, and then Doug, you're sort of talking about the burnout factor. You know, we're talking 14, 13, 15-year-old kids. If I had to do anything at that age, 7 days a week for 7-8 months, that much of my day, I'd want to throw myself off a roof. Like, how much?
Well, not only do these kids play the academy hockey and all that, how many of these kids are in spring programs? Like, I know a big thing when I was growing up, I played 3 sports, right? It wasn't just hockey year round. Like, I still remember Jerome McGinley saying that he grew up playing 3 sports. It wasn't hockey 10 months a year, where now a lot of these kids, it's hockey 10 months a year, right? That's burnout.
Ryan, what are your thoughts, Ryan, with what Lindsay had mentioned, how
the Thunder Bay.
Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, I'll use a team in our league as an example, the Thunder Bay North Stars. Right, they get a lot of their kids from the Thunder Bay Kings, the AAA program, and you know, U16s, U18s, things like that, and you know, they've got a unique situation. They get a lot of their kids from that Thunder Bay area. They come up through that Kings program. They go right to the North Stars program, and you know, they're in school all day. There's a low burnout factor. The practice at night, and you know, they're sleeping in their own bed. Mom's cooking them, you know, meatloaf, and you know, and then that same process kind of transfers through to the North Stars. And I don't think anybody can argue that, you know, carrying that same model that has worked for these guys in the Kings program up into that junior A level, you know, it works. It's almost, you know, opposite of the way everybody else works it at that level. And these guys are going to school, and Rob, you know, Degania, they kind of just have this loose and free kind of system there, and the kids thrive. I mean, you get Cody Brukowski last year. He's one of the top 5 scorers in all the CJHL. I mean, they had a kid last year. He committed to Bowling Green. You know, they're sending guys constantly to the OHL. You know, and they're taking that model that is a little bit different than the prep school or the academy style. They're keeping these kids in the AAA program, and it's working. They're producing these kids. So I feel like there is a little bit of that burnout, and I get what Lindsay's saying, like they're done at 4:30, but again, Shawn, you bring it up and reiterate it. Yeah, but what about all the 2 days that Ryan's talking about? What about all these weekend games? Like
Too bad. He was on a good roll.
Not a full
Yeah, there he goes.
Huh?
We lost you there, but before you keep going, we got to break for another commercial break, gents. We'll be right back. So, Doug, you probably lost your train of thought, and you kind of teetered out there.
No, I'm not gonna drag it out. I think the point is this, right? Like you know, I think Lindsay spoke about it. I think Shawn talked about it. I think both Shawns have talked about it. Ryan's talked about it. Everybody's talked about it. You got to find the pathway that works best for what you feel, or your son or daughter, you know, with that conversation. What does your family feel is the best pathway for what you want to attain? And each kid's different. We're all different. We all have coaching styles that are different and recruiting styles. I mean, it's it's really like it's a free market, right? And with a free market, you're gonna have different pathways, different avenues. It's just who feels that pathway is better for them, or staying in U18s or U16s or AAA versus going to the academy, or that prep school. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. And I don't think there's one straight pathway that you can say, well, it's either good or bad. I just don't know.
So, gentlemen, I think my question that I would have for all of you, and my comments and what I've heard tonight, is definitely, if I'm a parent, we need to do our research on either if we want our kid to stay in the midget style programs and run in that path, or if they should go to a prep school. The other thing I heard today is that if we are in a prep school, it seems to get more eyes on it, more scouts are looking at it. That's what I've heard. The other thing is it's presumed that they get more ice versus if they're with just a U18 team, that maybe it's 3 or 4 times a week. And then the games, there's also the burnout. So I think the question I have for all of you is, what do you personally foresee, not that we can all see into the future, but what do you guys see in the future for our prep schools and high schools and AA programs going forward? Do you guys, like we spoke about how this is probably going to weed out the bad apples, maybe we're going to lose a few, they won't be able to afford to come back. How do you think everybody's going to go in 21 to 2022? Look at that, I have 2021 on the bottom. But how do you think that it's going to happen going into next season? Do you think we're going to see more kids come back to the minor programs, or do you think we're going to see them continue in these prep school programs?
I don't think it's going to change. I think it's going to stay status quo. I think Lindsay and Ryan both mentioned that the prep school way is the way to go. So I think you're actually going to see over the next 5-10 years, you're going to see more prep schools pop up. They're just becoming more and more popular. Like you said, like Lindsay said, you can get the 6-7 all-star kids on the same team. Like if you look at us here in Calgary, we have the 4 quadrants, and we have the Calgary Buffaloes, who probably would have won the TELUS Cup last year, and they were in the TELUS Cup the year before. It's a rarity when you get those teams that go back to back and can do those things, right? But in prep schools, I think you're able to do that. You can keep that core group together. Doug talked about Thunder Bay. I think that's a rarity. I don't think it would be nice to see the communities or the associations get back to keeping all these kids together and growing them within an association. But I don't think that's the way things go. And I personally feel everything's going towards the prep school way.
My take from the outside looking in, as this has advanced more and more, and Shawn, you also mentioned the number of players that have been drafted to the WHL from prep schools. From when I started covering the league in 2010 until now, it's multiplied like wildfire. And the financial hit this year may have some, and just the reality of wanting to be closer to home, it may have some players, pulling back a bit, maybe even into next year a little. But ultimately, the quality of play discrepancy is going to be the biggest issue, I think. All these other things are factors, but I look at the Saskatchewan Pee Wee AA league, which is technically the AAA league for Saskatchewan because they don't have one. But the evaluation of the players at that level has been tougher and tougher as these changes have happened, because the level of play between the best player on the team and the worst, or the best teams and the worst teams, the gap has increased. It's going to keep creeping up. Pee Wee. I said Pee Wee. I meant Bantam. It's going to happen in Bantam. It's going to happen more and more in midget. It's already started, because you're pulling all these elite players and sending them off to these academies. Then the level of play decreases. Players who wouldn't have been on those teams before are now getting onto those teams. And then as the level of play decreases, you're not getting as better against the competition, and the gap is starting to increase. And so if you're an elite player, you're not going to want to be there anymore. So finance is going to be a part of it, but ultimately it's going to be, where is the best competition? And that has decided where players go for generations. Money is a factor, prestige, all those things. Where is the best competition? And that's going to be the academies more and more.
Lindsay, Ryan, Doug?
And I think that it's the area that the province that you live in. East Coast, I think you're going to see more and more academies out BC. In Ontario, there'll be a blend of. I don't think anything's going to touch the GTHL as far as the draft year for the OHL goes, because number one, the rules for recruiting and schedule for the prep teams is restrictive, so it's not a level playing field. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I think they'll keep refining and getting better. I don't really buy the burnout thing. In 30 years, I've never seen a kid burn out on hockey, but we didn't. I don't know, maybe things have changed, but we never did 2-a-days at the Hill because they had to do school and in their workout and stuff. And I found it was actually less because they could actually sleep, get to bed early and whatnot through the day. But I find, like anything, if you want burnout, go ask a competitive swimmer how they feel about their regime, or a professional or Olympic figure skater. I mean, I think there's just passion, and there's certain things you got to be willing to do if you want to play at the highest level or the NHL.
Whoop, we lost Lindsay. Doug, Ryan?
Yeah, well, the big thing, like you said too, is commitment and passion, right? If a kid's got the passion and the commitment to play at the level, they're not going to get burnout. I think a lot of the burnout's coming from the spring program, not from the prep schools and stuff. So there's pros and cons. Like Shawn said, maybe the academies next year might have a bit of a drawback because how many people have lost their jobs due to COVID, right? But I agree 100% with it watering down the association leagues. Like I know, for example, on one of our teams a couple of years ago, our U18 AAA team, we had 3 first years make the team, and then the following year, those guys would have been the vets, and those 3 first years went to prep school, right? So that hurts a program when you're trying to build a team for next year, and then the 3 pillars you had slotted in those slots move on to a prep school, right? So it does water down the competition for sure.
When I talk about burnout, I referenced that kid. I don't think that the burnout's coming from the hockey. I just think that, you get these academies and all the requirements that are put on them in outside areas, and it's easy to say that, if a kid wants to play at the highest level, he's going to make it happen. I think we're not seeing as mentally strong younger people as we maybe used to, right? Like the fortitude to say, you know what, maybe I'm not the happiest, but this is what I want to get. Like, this is what I want to attain. Like, sure, you're going to push through it. Like and that's delving into a whole different social issue. But, when it comes to when it comes to the hockey portion of it, again, I say it, there isn't one size fits all. And I think it could be right in certain situations, it'd be wrong in certain situations. It's definitely watering down the minor hockey. When you're plucking these kids out, I think, with what Lindsay says and Shawn, reiterates it, you are definitely watering down the association hockey. You're pulling these kids out. What does that do for the development at the lower levels? And, finding these kids, in larger clumps that are able to play at the higher levels, and able to play at the prep schools or the junior level or the pro or college. But, I'm just starting to see and hear more and more from the kids that, the experience is bad. Obviously, I think that's doing more homework, and you've got to do more research. You've got to know who you're getting in bed with, and what their goal for you is, and what you're having realistic goals on your end. So,
well, I think about it like the change in the pressure is there automatically. I put my daughter in soccer last spring. I paid $250. I bought some cleats for $40, shin guards. Like, my investment's less than $500 for her to play soccer. If I'm doing that, I don't care if she's playing 80% of the game, if she's got 15 goals, if she's got a chance to advance or compete in the sport. You turn around and invest $30,000 in your kid each year, all of a sudden that becomes, depending on who you are and depending on what kind of parent you are and depending on how much money you have, but there's a feel of I'm making an investment and I got to get something out of this investment. And that translates into extra pressure on kids that you might not have had in the way that hockey was before. Now, there's always pressure from certain parents, and there's always some parents that are amazing supports even with the high level of investment. But I think the extra pressure is coming down on those kids to a degree, because if I'm putting that much money into you, I want to see something happen, whether it's getting to the NHL or at least major progression.
And that doesn't even, Shawn, that doesn't even factor in social media and all these other outside factors and outside weights that are on these kids from each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like it just compounds, I think.
Well, look, Doug, you're talking about, look at the way it is with social media. Like, we have mental health coaches now for our teams and our players, right? Like, we're doing these, our association right now with the shutdown, we're doing all these Zoom activities. They're doing dryland via Zoom. They were doing team building via Zoom. Like my team tonight, we had a holiday baking competition because we're trying to keep the kids engaged and stuff like that, right? And then once a week, or every 2 weeks, we have a mental health coach who's actually from Saskatchewan on talking to these boys, saying, it's a different thing. It's different how to deal with social media, how to keep yourself busy and not be glued to your screens. But how do we tell them you're not glued to your screens when they're doing schooling through Zoom? They're doing everything through Zoom, right? Like in Alberta, we can't leave our houses almost, pretty much. So it's a whole different aspect. Like when we wanted to talk to people, it was hello, yeah, no, I don't want to talk to you, hang up. These kids are glued to these things, right? And we're glued to them too as coaches. Like I'm on the phone like every week with the guy from Caisse saying, what are we going to do next year for recruiting kids? We have no information on these kids. Have they grown? What kind of stats do they have? Do we go off of last year's stats? Like this whole shutdown and this whole everything is just throwing a big curveball into all of hockey, I think.
Yeah. Ryan, what are you seeing? I mean, with the position you're in, with, the 15, 16, stuff like that, what are you seeing with that? Like with the mental and the...
I didn't hear.
I didn't hear it.
He's saying, what are you seeing with mental health?
Like, what are you seeing with your 16s and 18s? Like, and your 15s even? Like, I mean...
Well, I'll be honest. Our hockey program that I was involved in at the beginning of this year, we pulled the pin early because we didn't feel like it was going to be viable through the COVID process. So we were one of the ones that decided early that we were going to do best for our kids, because we're reliant on all the prep school kids. And then when the prep schools started to say, our kids are not going to be allowed to leave campus and bubbling, and it just made things far more difficult to actually run. So, I talked to the kids that were going to play. They ended up on other teams, but I know that the pre and post seasons that go on in New England that I was involved in, it's going to be tough to recruit for, because you don't know what's going on for those kids that are going back to prep school. Who's leaving? Who's not? Like, it's hard to keep track on kids because there's no games. So it's going to make recruiting pretty difficult for next year. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen? And this whole situation is just tough.
So do you guys all foresee discounts coming for next season?
No.
At every level?
I don't see discounts happening. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're paying for a season, you get what you're promised in your contract or your player card that you're signing. I mean, as long as you get what you're signing for, there's no reason for discounts, and there's no reason to give a discount at the start of the year. If there's any extenuating circumstances that prevents kids from getting what they're supposed to pay for, well, then that's when discounts got to happen, or refunds or anything like that. But the big issue too that you're going to see is some of the poor operators, they're going to be forced to have to give discounts right off the bat, because they probably aren't giving refunds this year to the kids that they're not providing what those kids paid for this year. So those are the ones that are going to be having to give discounts, because they're not going to be able to recruit players because word will have gotten out that, well, they didn't give a refund because they only paid a 15-game season, even though they were promised 40, right? And then they just kept all the money anyways. And, I mean, those are going to be the circumstances where discounts are going to happen because it's the only way that they're going to be able to get players.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be like for our association. I wouldn't want to be on the board and figure out what kind of money they got to give back to the parents or whatever this year. If we don't go or if the seasons are cut down, like that would be a nightmare trying to figure that out. But costs are costs. So they do their budgets at the beginning of the year. They say it's going to cost X amount of dollars. And if we have 20 kids on our roster, this is what it costs per kid. Like you said, some of the varsity kids get free rides. So some of the lower level kids pay for those kids. We all know that. That's the way the prep program works. So costs are costs. They're going to charge up. They're going to charge, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a great show. I thank all of you very much for joining us tonight. It's been greatly appreciated. Everyone, thanks for sitting with us this evening, and going over some things that these awesome gentlemen have been able to provide you with. Hopefully, it's helped you out going into next season. And stay tuned for another show. Be next week. Take care.